Hello and welcome to HealthTech Hour on UK Health Radio, the world's largest talk health radio. My name is Steve Roost, and each week we bring you the best news, views and interviews with the CEOs, leaders and clinicians who are driving the health tech revolution in the UK and beyond. I am a CEO and founder of a health tech company myself, and I'm passionate about the people and companies who are changing the world. Before I introduce today's guest, I'd like to remind everyone, all our regular listeners, to follow us on the socials. It's at HealthTech Hour and at UK Health Radio to stay on top of all of the great content that's coming up on the show. My guest today is Hugh Lloyd-Jukes, the CEO of Oxehealth, who have developed a platform called Oxyvision, which allows vital signs readings such as pulse, breathing rate, and other key indicators to be measured without needing to contact or come into contact with the patient. It works by having optical sensors installed in the patient's rooms, which monitor continuously, and it's backed by an AI system that can tell clinicians when they need to intervene. Why does contact-free measurement matter? Well, Oxyvision is installed in over 40% of mental health trusts in the UK, which has meant that severely ill and vulnerable people are able to get a full night's sleep while also being protected from harming themselves. For clinicians, it means that they no longer have to go into a patient's room every few hours, all through the day and all through the night, which reduces their stress levels and improves their performance as well. Oxehealth talk about themselves as allowing clinicians to deliver proactive care to some of the most vulnerable people in health and care in the health and care system. And I'm very excited to hear how they do this. So Hugh, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much, Steve. Thanks for having me on.
How are you? What's the mood in the camp like? I kind of ask everyone this question. I know that lockdown's kind of easing, but what is the mood over there in the camp at Oxehealth like?
I think it's as it has been, to be honest, Steve. I have a confession. My son was born the first week of lockdown, so I wasn't actually available and with the team when we went into lockdown running for COVID in the UK or overseas. So for me, it was a seamless transition. But I think that the team, obviously, we moved to the remote working or hybrid working because a number of our staff are key workers supporting the NHS and other clinical services on the front line. And so I think we really, in the UK, Sweden, the US, have this hybrid way of working kind of down, and the team just stay focused on what do the clinicians and the patients need in terms of bringing the service live and keeping it operating for them. And I think we just hold on to that whilst all around us there's all sorts of uncertainty, and that keeps our focus.
Good. And did you say you were in Sweden as well? Was there a difference between how things were there versus the UK in terms of the reaction to things, or was it roughly the same way?
Yeah, so we have businesses in the UK, Sweden, and in America, and most of our team are in the UK. The Americas very early, but Sweden we have a substantial team serving Swedish care homes, and there were differences in the speed of lockdowns, the nature of lockdowns across Sweden and the US. I think the response at Oxehealth, we said we try and be caring, data-led, and considered in how we coped with that and stay focused on what really matters, and that seems to have helped us ride it out in Europe and in the UK.
Great. Well, look, as regular listeners will know, and I know that we talked about in our production call before the show's in 3 parts. So the first part is more of an origins part as to how you came to be on the journey that you're on and ending up at Oxehealth. The middle bit is all about how and what all of the incredible things that Oxehealth is doing, obviously not just in the UK, but Sweden. And I know that you've started to do some things in the United States, which is very exciting. And then the final piece is what the future holds. And if we've got time, we can kick around some topics of the day that might be connected to what you guys are doing. So let's start with you. So how did your journey into the world of work sort of start? Because I know that you weren't always in health tech or healthcare.
Yeah, well, I think, my dad's a soldier. And so we moved, before I was 7, I'd lived in 5 places. So I was born in Northern Ireland, and we bounced between the UK to India, back out to Germany and back. Classic kind of soldier's child. And I don't know, but I think that one thing I noticed there, and you can't help but notice, is how different life experiences are and how different we're all wired. And so I think there is a primary question for me, which is how do we each find our place in the world? What is a happy life? And how do we then work together to build healthier companies, institutions, societies? So I think I've become very interested in how a diversity of views and backgrounds creates new things, creates innovation. And that's something we've benefited from as a company in Oxehealth, and I think across the healthcare ecosystem, how you bring all those stakeholders together. So I think the creativity from difference, and then how you build something together, how you collaborate to build something that that makes life a little bit better and helps us all get along our journey. And I think that's the theme probably of my career, because I mean, if we could go round it a bit, but I effectively took that question into a law degree, which is really, the law is about how you try to reconcile these competing dreams and fears that we have in society. I don't know if I was the only person on the course who had no intention of practicing the law as a lawyer, but I certainly didn't. And I think then it was a question that business gives you a chance to try and create stuff quickly and with people and try things out. And frankly, at 21, it was also about adventure. So I became a strategy consultant. I helped write a book called The Secrets of CEOs, where 100 of top CEOs helped us on how they lead. And I turned that into a startup consulting business with a partner when in my mid-20s. And that took me all over the world. And I think, again, it's funny that I ended up working in the Sahara Desert in Mauritania, in the Alps in Peru, out in Australia. China. We had an office in China we started. So we're between London, China, and these far-flung places, as well as working financial businesses in the Channel Islands. So again, it was about, in these different places, how you use what you've got as people to keep a mind open, develop a strategy around a transportation business, work in supermarkets. So I became really interested in safety critical industries. So, you know, if you've got a mine, the sad truth is, you know, I've been on site when someone's died during that operation. And one's constantly trying to create a good thing, which is to create resources, or an airline was trying to move people from A to B, but one's handling these very dangerous risks. So how can you create a scaling organization that handles those risks and creates that benefit? And so after about, the business is still running, Xingfu is still out there, Steve and the team are doing great things, but I sold out after about 6 years in my early 30s, because I just felt that two things really, that I wanted to not advise, but I wanted to help craft something and try and create a longer lasting, more enduring impact. One worries sometimes that as an advisor, one's just along for part of the journey. And the other thing, frankly, is I wanted to get married, have a child, and I was on a plane 100 times a year over all these time zones. It's a bit, even against what I do now, that's a bit challenging. So but I still, just like when I left university, I wanted to start a business. I didn't have a good idea. So I was reflecting a little bit about, well, what brings benefit to people? Okay, healthcare seems like the most pressing need, but I'm not a doctor, so that's not helping me forward. But maybe I could bring this idea of bringing different groups together around safety critical growth, and contribute that way. And so I found IP Group, who spin great ideas into great companies. They introduced me to Professor Tarasenko, who had the core nugget of IP for Oxehealth. Joined as commercial director, and then I've been lucky enough to lead the company as chief exec for 5 years.
Well, that's a great journey. So going back to, I know you, the Secrets of CEOs was your book, and it seems like from that period of time, you're consulting, you were working with, you know, I would imagine, you know, tens, if not hundreds of very, very high level, very successful CEOs. And now you are a successful CEO in your own right. What are the lessons or behaviors that you took from speaking to those people and working across those industries, safety critical industries and others, that those behaviors that you have tried to maintain, or the behaviors that you consistently saw would deliver success, but with safety?
So, I mean, I was lucky to help Steve Tappan and Andy Cave of The Telegraph write that book, and they had me along for that, which was brilliant. But we did have a wonderful time writing that. So we got to meet with some of the doyens of that era. So John Brown's first interview back in Public Life from BP, Mick Davis at Xstrata, a fabulous example of building a mining business. Terry Leahy over at Tesco. So just a few handling Carolyn McCall at EasyJet. So some very senior people. And I wouldn't draw a comparison between my own chief exec status and those guys. I think that's generous, but
not yet.
But not a bit generous. That. Thank you all the same. I wouldn't make that thing. But it was really interesting because we kind of dove into these 5 or 6 different ways that people seem to cluster around driving financial value, for example, versus managing an operation tightly. So you have to put, I think, as a chief executive and as an organization, you have to put your emphasis about 1 or 2 core beliefs and ways of working that go alongside your strategy. So I think in Oxehealth, what we've focused on, I think, as core beliefs, for better or worse, and hopefully these have been the right decisions. One is helping because we don't, there's a great mistake in technology businesses in health, which is the tech suddenly becomes the hero. But well, that's not true, is it? Because the patient needs the support or wants the tools, and the clinician is the person who has the expert judgment, the empathetic heart, the skilled hands to go help. So all we can do is help. So I think it's very important to focus on helping clinicians and helping the teams, because I think increasingly in the areas we work, it's a team game. So helping clinicians and trying to be helpful. And I think the other thing is our primary value of all our values is learning together, because we started out with this nice little bit of insight from an engineering lab, and we were trying to learn how that could help people and how to help people understand what use to make of it. So your rate of growth, I think, in a modern business is really limited by your ability to learn. So how quickly can you learn as an organization defines how quickly you can grow. So for me, it's about learning together, helping clinicians, and then focusing on what really matters, being a safe pair of hands to the people who are helping save lives and improve healthcare. So I've tried to put, for what it's worth, at the center of our organization under my stewardship, those two core beliefs are where we start from. Does that make any kind of sense?
No, it makes a huge amount of sense. And I think that it's really valuable that I'm a CEO myself of a smaller company than Oxehealth, but, we're on our journey, and, we're also in the health tech space. And I completely agree with you that if you're not able to elaborate very clearly on the problem that you solve, and if the problem that you solve is not central, and you end up talking too much about your own technology or putting your technology ahead of what the actual problem is, because the problem by definition will be a problem for somebody. Ergo, you're working for that person to solve that problem for them, or with them, or in collaboration with them, using your technology either as it stands or some adapted version, or however ultimately you roll it out. But if you move too far away from what that problem is, you lose sight of how you're helping. And I think that particularly, if you can't, I do a course myself for my background's in sales and commercial. So I do a course called Sales for Founders, which is focused at training technical founders in sales skills, which they don't necessarily have come naturally to them. And one of the biggest things, the biggest mistakes that we see, it's like lesson number one, is talk about your problem, not your technology. And it sort of goes right to the core of what you were just saying.
I agree. And I think your point about doing things with others, I often say to the team, like, imagine you're leading one of the healthcare organizations, the hospital trusts that we work with. You're bombarded by people with useful sounding technology, and you know that technology can support the work of your teams. But how do you build trust that you, as an expert in your clinical and operational sphere, has got a meeting someone with a similar level of expertise, in our case in biomedical engineering and systems engineering, people, technology, data, coming together to help the person on the ground deliver the care for that individual in need or at risk? And so for me, I think it's about, and I think healthcare, we do struggle with this. It's about recognizing each other's expertise and strengths and learning to collaborate for that shared goal, because delivery of healthcare is so complex that if you're not doing it, as you say, we're kind of all stuffed, aren't we?
Well, particularly if you're talking about healthcare, health tech within the NHS or within a larger healthcare organization. It's a completely different ball game from what people might understand as a normal commercial process. Just because of the way that it's funded, the way that it's structured, the different stakeholders. So when you were kind of looking to move from consulting into, one of these safety-led industries, what was and you ended up looking at Oxehealth. What was the sort of prevailing health tech scene like at the time? What other things were around? What was interesting you within health at the time? What did you find interesting? Can you remember?
Yeah, so I remember thinking, well, I felt very strongly I wanted to go into a deep IP business with intellectual property. I didn't want to, there's lots of really high quality innovation where we're taking telephony or the skills of user-centric design to create a great seamless experience that helps people participate more easily in healthcare and drives tremendous value, particularly in community settings. But I felt that wasn't really where my passion or skill would lie, that I wanted to do something more enterprise and more deep in original IP. And I just find that process fascinating. And so it's then what you notice is there's a ton of interesting academic work around with actually increasing amounts. I think probably not yet enough investment, and the Woodford challenges have been a bit difficult for the life sciences sector, but particularly, but there's plenty of cash looking to help those ideas. But it's so tricky to choose one, to find one that is sufficiently developed that you can see just about see where it's going to go,
Yeah.
such that you can help it, rather than one that needs to percolate in a lab for another 3 or 4 years before
Yeah, because
the world's ready to receive it.
Because as a non-scientist and as a non-clinician, did you need it to be of a certain point for your value to really come into its own?
Well, I mean, I did for my own purpose, but actually that's the challenge for everyone. You know, the academic doesn't want their work to go out too early, because it may actually get tarnished before it's really robust enough. And the venture capitalist needs it to come out early enough that they can fund it at an early stage, but not so early that it won't work. And I think with Oxehealth, it's been interesting. There was a period where we had this insight around photoplethysmography, the way the micro blushes of your skin when your heart beats. When your heart beats, your ears are turning red. So right now you're flashing at me on the video, red, not red, red, not red. But we can't see that because it's outside our field of view. But if I put infrared illumination on that, just like in a night vision camera, we can signal process and detect those blushes, micro blushes. Same with breathing. Obviously, your body is moving in time with your chest movement. And so that core insight from Lionel, Professor Tarasenko, who until recently was head of engineering at Oxford University, and is actually the founding president of the newest Oxford College, Reuben College.
Oh, wow.
So Lionel, very senior academic, his group at the Institute of Biomedical Engineering had come up with those insights. They pushed them forward. And then it was really, there was a couple of years, I think, where the company was working out, you know, are we going to be handheld? Is there a market for this on a handheld mobile phone? Well, there is, but it's tiny. You know, cars, we have patents around doing this in driver monitoring, but actually it turns out there are better ways of doing that because you're sat in a seat. So I'm not convinced that you really need the camera. You know, airplanes, you can imagine. And until we settled, it was a process of winnowing into the problem we now solve, which I'm sure we'll discuss later, about single occupancy patient rooms. So I think there's always this kind of back and forth between the tech's full potential and the market. And at some point you have to make it a company and do that. And I think I hope to think I was quite a big part of that dialogue and then getting us focused.
Well, do you feel like that your background as a strategy consultant helped in that winnowing down process? It sounds like it might have done. So it sounds like almost like a nice consulting project, which is, we've got this fantastic piece of technology. We need some help to establish what market sector it might be best used in.
Yeah, I think a number of the skills I learned at the Parthenon Group were super helpful, for sure. Absolutely.
And when you we'll come on to what the platform does, what the technology does in a second. Just one final question: what was the two questions actually? The first is, when you saw the technology or had it explained to you for the first time, what was your reaction? Was it like an epiphany, or was it more of a slow burn for you?
I wish that we weren't in COVID. I'd bring it, Steve, like 95%, and that's actually pretty much a stat. And I'm not, you know, say, my God, it's magic. Right, because I can. Well, you imagine you can see it on you put someone in a demonstration room, and then someone just clicks into our interface, and then a heart rate and a breathing rate appears.
Yeah, I've seen the videos on the website. It looks like amazing on the website.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. And so, to be honest, I think it is breathtaking the first time you see it, particularly in a clinical setting. You're just plucking this medically certified reading out of the air, and I was hooked.
Special.
Yeah,
that is pretty special. And at the time, was there anything vaguely? There was nothing like this, really. There was. What was the landscape like for remote monitoring? Was it even really that advanced at this point? I don't know, when you started.
To be honest, it still isn't really. Steve, I think, you know, what we find we need in these settings. So we work where you have a single individual in a room. So this is anywhere from the step down ward of a hospital down to a care home, much less clinically acute, via mental health, which in the UK is our leading market, skilled nursing in America, these settings. So where you have a mixture of physiological risk, you may have a heart condition or multiple comorbidities, but you're also going to have probably some physical risk. So in the elderly, you know, the risk of falling over. In psychiatric care, it can be a risk of self-harm or assault from other patients, depending on the pathway. So what we found is, so we introduced it, as you said in your intro, a vision-based patient monitoring and management system that allows clinicians to intervene proactively, so get in ahead of an adverse event, but also plan care proactively, such that you can look at the risk factors, you can look at the positive improvement in condition, and you can plan the care regime. But the real insight that we had, and this shows you kind of the journey from the lab to growth. We obviously started with the non-contact photoplethysmography, the pulse rate, and the non-contact breathing rate. But then you realize actually we had started doing them with an optical sensor, a digital camera, because that allows you to go contact free.
Yeah.
Then you realize actually that counterintuitively, you can create more privacy for the patient in the room by having the optical sensor also occasionally, under very controlled conditions, display a brief clip of that person to the nurse that's outside the room, because that means the nurse doesn't have to enter the room, doesn't have to wake you up. So suddenly you need pulse and breathing rate and video. And we didn't realize that at the outset. We thought you just need pulse and breathing. But then what you realize is you need movement, you need activity, because you want to know, is that person in bed, in the
Have
room,
they fallen?
in the bathroom? Have they fallen over? Are they getting out of bed? Can I get in there before they fall over?
Right.
So what the kind of the journey of the early years was to realize the magic is the combination of those three.
Yeah.
And once you realize that, that's where we became really distinctive. And that's our point of difference, is to enable vision on demand by a clinician who could otherwise enter the room and only in the facility, pulse and breathing rate, spot check and trends, depending on your geography, and movement.
Okay.
And that's the unique package.
I mean, like I said, we talked about it in the production call. We've done our research. It sounds like an incredible system. So just briefly, let's go over the technology, because I know that you've thrown out a term there, which I won't try and replicate myself. But maybe you could just give a brief overview just of exactly how the technology works. And then let's go into, if you can, from a patient's perspective, but also from a clinician's perspective, like a walkthrough of what the Oxehealth or Oxyvision system does. So I think it's, and what I'm really interested in, well, I kind of know the answer because we did this before, but I think what would be very interesting for the listeners is, why does privacy matter on a clinical level? Why is it important to a patient or the patients where Oxyvision is installed?
Absolutely. So what the objective when you introduce the Oxehealth service, the Oxyvision technology platform, is that the care that clinicians are able to deliver becomes safer, the care outcomes become higher quality, and the efficiency by which you can achieve those results goes up. Those are the three things that we're trying to help clinicians achieve. So what happens is that we will install into, let's take a psychiatric hospital, so an older adult ward, a dementia ward. Each person has their own bedroom, and in there we will work with the estates team of the hospital to place an optical sensor. It's about 2 centimeters long, digital camera. It's off the shelf. It's completely generic. There's no intelligence in that. It's mainly used in self-driving cars and other industrial applications. But it just happens to be a good platform to generate the signals that we will need to process to develop the insight. So that's placed on the wall with some infrared illumination, which allows it to operate day and night. It's in a housing, which means that it can be cleaned, and also if a patient sometimes patients can damage their rooms in some of these settings, and that means that the kit is protected and the patient can't hurt themselves. That is observing the patient continuously and confidentially. So it is hardwired to a server on the ward or on the hospital estate. It's not going up over the internet. It's not going
on the cloud. It's nowhere. It's within the facility.
No, it's within the facility. The processing happens locally. Our algorithms are hosted on a server within the facility under the control of the clinical team. And what's happening is light hits that sensor and it's turned into ones and zeros. And those ones and zeros can be reconstituted, like on this Zoom call, as an image. So you put some software that turns it back into colors and movement and sound and so forth. But those ones and zeros can also be processed mathematically, because as I say, when your ears are flashing red from your heartbeat, that's creating effectively a sine wave, approximately a sine wave. And we can pluck out of all the other random signals in there, because of our proprietary patented technology. We can find that sine wave, pluck it out and count it and say that is a pulse rate.
Okay.
That is exactly what the contact devices that you see in the GP surgery are doing, but they have to be on your skin.
The
They're
finger clip, the oximeters.
Yeah, they're exactly. The oximeters in GPs, finger clips, are doing exactly the same. They're counting the red blushes, they're doing some maths, but their job is much easier because the random signal is near zero because it's on the skin.
Because they're clamped to your skin.
Exactly. So fundamentally, we're a computer vision, but really we're a signal processing group.
Okay.
Where there's random mathematical noise in the room in this binary 1 and 0, and our maths distills that out and says, okay, that's all noise. That's sunlight. That's Steve moving around. That is Steve's pulse rate.
So I understand how the pulse rate you get. I can understand from the vasodilation and the blushing of the micro. What was it called? Micro blushes.
Micro blushing.
Micro blushes. But is the breathing rate connected to that process as well, or is it a separate?
Yeah, exactly. So the breathing rate is also conceptually, it's in, out, in, out. And so you can plot that again as a periodic signal.
Okay.
And so again, you're looking for the characteristics of a periodic signal that aren't light effects or movement effects. But again, it's a computer vision problem. Where's the body in the room? Where is the breathing rate? Am I confident it's a breathing rate? So we calculate these from still bodies. We don't do it when you're walking around. So when you're at rest, sitting, lying, some standing. So you have the optical sensor. It's feeding back through a secured wire to the processing unit. The processor is plucking out pulse breathing rate as appropriate, but also movement information. And it is then displaying the status of that room on a tablet. It's in the staff's hand, and it'll be red, green, amber. Green, they're in room. Red, they might have fallen over or they might be stuck in the bathroom. Amber, you told us to let you know if they'd left the room. They've left the room. So you can select as the carer exactly what you see.
Right. You can basically you can set up your own alert system based on the necessities of that facility or that patient.
Correct. Exactly.
Okay. Right.
So you've got it at a glance for the first time, rather than sort of wandering down the 15 rooms and trying to work out where everyone is. You know what their status is within the room and whether they're in it. And as I say, we push then alerts around activity and warnings into the work stream, audibly and visually. And you can also, and you can interpret that. We're not diagnostic. We're just giving you some information.
Yeah.
You can also choose to enter into that tablet and take a pulse and breathing rate. That has to be a conscious choice.
Okay.
To take a spot check. So you click on the square that represents that room, and it'll say, okay, here's a live video, and it's times out after 15 seconds. And it's really, are they still? Because you must be taken from a still body. But it's also implicitly, if the clinician sees something that worries them, they're gone, right? They're in there.
They're in there.
So there's a safety check. And this is the privacy point that we were talking about earlier. By having that ability to look in, I don't need to come and check you periodically. I can do it remotely without waking you up. And I can see in the dark now.
So yeah, go on, carry on.
So you've clicked in, you've seen they're still, then you click, and if pulse and breathing rate are available, they'll be displayed. And then you have a sense of their medical status, and you visually check them. So it's spot checks, it's alerts, and the last bit is reporting. Because really with the alerts and the spot checks, you're looking for early warning signs just before someone gets hurt. But the other thing you want to do is risk factors. So for example, in the UK, and this is not available under the FDA clearance yet, we will look into that. We also provide trend data in your pulse and breathing rate, so the clinician can look. And there was a lovely example of this through COVID. We'd often get the feedback, this individual was in the room, they appeared fine, but I saw their breathing rate just starting to drift up, and they got up to about 28, 25, 26, very high. We submitted them for a COVID test. They had COVID. We were able to isolate them, care for them, or send them to the hospital, bring them back, and manage their isolation period.
Wow.
So it's a brilliant example of the risk factors. You can just see it in the trends, right?
Well, yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah.
And I think what's we can come on to the pathways and the patient pathways and the clinician pathways. The reason why I really love what you guys are doing is we talked about this before the show, is that it's the problem that you're solving has been up until now largely dealt with sort of a human solution, which is people going in and checking and poking people and taking measurements, or not doing it, and there being issues, and it creates a huge amount of human workload and stress within the system. And it's a very complicated, extremely clever piece of technology that has created a very simple solution, right? You can't have the solution is so simple because the technology is so clever and so advanced. And that's what I really like. That's why I like doing the show. So what could you just walk us through why this really makes a difference to patients and to clinicians?
Well, I think I will, Stephen. I think you just touched on it. So you've got this thing in the room, it's doing these processes, it's pushing stuff up, but it's also providing these reports that we'll come back to that allow you to look at risk factors. So you've got your early warning sign, oh, maybe I need to get in. I've got my risk factors as a clinician. But the key thing is, as I said, that key foundation is you're helping clinicians. So this is not telling the clinician what to do. This is giving more insight so the clinician can exercise clinical judgment. The clinician then deploys themselves into that environment if they need to. So they choose their intervention. So this is about providing more insight to clinicians, clinical foresight, so they can intervene. So I think if we look at what you see happen on the wards, the patient feels reassured, because patients in these settings and in care homes want to be looked after. They know they're vulnerable, but they also deserve, as a human right, privacy, dignity, and independence. And these individuals want to live in their care home unobstructed, recover within a mental health setting, or mobilize and be demedicalized after hospital. So it's really important that people feel they're living a full life within whatever facility they're in for the short or long term. And so being disturbed by people checking you is immediately taking away that sense of normalcy that enables you to recover and feel fully human. And well, not fully human, that's unfair, but to have your full privacy and your sense of dignity respected. So the first thing,
as well as you, I mean, just on a basic level, you're not going to have a great night's sleep.
It's also, the irony is these people we all need to sleep, and particularly if you're recovering from any physical or psychological condition. Exactly. So the patient feels reassured. They don't get woken up as frequently or risk getting woken up, because let's be clear, staff try to do these checks very sensitively.
Yeah.
But then consider, you're the patient, you don't want to get woken up, but you're the staff member. Have you ever looked through a darkened hatch or darkened door at night and tried to see someone's chest move? Like, well, if you've got a child, you have, right? You're trying to peer into the baby monitor. Is Max breathing?
Yeah.
That's what it's like. And this could be a life or death situation, the stress of that, and knowing that you're not sure when you do the check whether it's okay, but then you're not going to be back for 15, 60, 240 minutes. What happens in between? So that lack of peace of mind for the staff matches the lack of peace and quiet for the patient. And so that's really at the human dynamic you're trying to help with. But if you can then empower with clinical insight they didn't have before, you couldn't get a pulse and breathing rate, with time series data you can't gather, time in bed, time in bathroom, oh, Mr. Miggins is going to the bathroom 5 times more than normal, wonder if he has a UTI. You give that data, you're suddenly helping clinicians use their judgment and their training to then intervene only where needed, and not to waste time patrolling. And so you give time back, you give reassurance, and you give privacy. And that's the real magic when it's working on a ward. That you can feel the human benefit of that.
Yeah, and is it true? I think I read somewhere that you have patients who will specifically request to go into a room that has Oxyvision in it. Is that true?
It's a lovely vignette, actually. So mostly now we are in every room in a ward or a hospital, because we've become more mature in how people work with us. But early on, we perhaps roll out to a few rooms on a ward, and this was actually in a secure psychiatric facility with an individual who was I forget the diagnosis, but I think it was a paranoia diagnosis and there's schizophrenia.
Okay.
And what was fascinating is people think, well, even if you're controlling the video, is this, people aren't going to be comfortable. And this individual was requesting to be placed in that room, despite having had paranoid episodes that had been quite severe, because they felt safer.
Right.
And they knew they were at risk because they'd had a medical complication.
Right.
And that's the nub of it. That's the irony, that by introducing this extra supervision, you actually create more privacy.
Okay, I think that's amazing. And so what do the nurses and clinicians and staff members on the ground, what's their view of the system, and what's their reaction to it?
I mean, my favorite piece of feedback that's in a published white paper with one of our NHS partners is we think of it as the 6th member of staff on our night shift.
Right.
People find it it gives them that peace of mind, that gives them that extra bandwidth that they'd get from having an extra teammate. And so we want the Oxyvision to feel like a teammate, a very narrow, can't replace you teammate, but a teammate nevertheless.
Yeah. And were these staff members suffering from severe amounts of stress? Because I can imagine that working those night shifts with vulnerable patients of any kind and not be and be sort of, like you said, having to do rounds once every 120 minutes, 240 minutes, whatever it is, that might be quite stressful because you don't know what's going to happen as soon as you leave the room.
Yeah, so I think our clinicians find their jobs really satisfying and stimulating and get a great deal from them. But the statistics in the NHS from 2019, which is the year before COVID, is that 38% of nurses had at least one day off through work-related stress. The sheer workload and the delivering of this very conscientious objective is tremendously hard for the clinical staff that we work with, and I have a huge respect for that.
Well, I mean, anything that can help with that, it's got to be a good thing. So what if they're not using Oxyvision, what is being used, if anything? Like what's the comparison currently?
So in the inpatient mental health setting, there really isn't much technology around. There have been some attempts to use door sensors to detect ligatures on the door itself, if someone sadly is trying to hang themselves off a door, but pretty much otherwise everything else is kind of a self-harm risk in most of the pathways. There have been some bed mats to try and decide if someone's in bed or not, but it's been really quite difficult to equip those pathways with technology. That's where the contact-free, out of reach, supportive assistance of Oxyvision is so useful. In the other end of the spectrum, much less acute, is the care home, and I think Sweden's probably the most advanced system there. And what you're seeing there is super interesting. So they've had, for in contrast to UK care homes, there's a budget. Every Swedish care home has a budget called for welfare technology, which is something that is not true in UK care homes, or indeed in most places. So that's where they're ahead of us. They've noticed the power of technology.
There's a portion of every Swedish care home budget that's designed to invest in
technology. Correct. Wow. Yeah. And most care homes in Sweden are municipal, and they have those, about 110,000 of them. So, and that budget has been deployed historically against what they now call conventional welfare technologies. So that is a suite of bed mats and door sensors that are trying to give you the activity portion of what I described earlier.
Yeah.
And what the industry has realized over the last 3 years is that those technologies, although well-intentioned, have typically been put together by security firms, because it's basically your intruder alerts repurposed to treat the patient as the intruder, which is bizarre, but sensible. And what's happened is they have not been clinically attuned to the risk factors, and they've created a lot of excess alerting, and they've just created alerts rather than clinical insight. So it's not clinical foresight, it's workload. So actually, carers in Sweden self-describe as alert responders rather than carers, which is a completely to reverse the technologies in
that's really interesting. That's really interesting. So like you say, well-intentioned, obviously, but as opposed to what Oxyvision does, which provides data in effect that people can use to make a judgment on, and it's a supportive element that they can dip in and out of, they can refer to, there are alerts, but the other things are purely alert based, which is, overstimulating. Those alerts are sort of false positives, so to speak. Is that
yes. So you can describe it in two ways. So what we can describe it as is the false positive rate. So that's technically what's going on. If only they were, but actually you've got to think about it slightly differently. What those do is they create reactive care. So it was, what can I tell you about that you can react to, and you will typically arrive late and find there's a problem. That what you've got to do is create proactive care. So you have to have some sense of the clinical risk factors and early warning signs. So you're creating a rich insight into from which the clinician draws their clinical foresight. And a good example of that is there's a lot of innovation in this space around the world to try and serve the elderly population in care homes. What people normally try to do is say, well, falls is a massive driver of harm and cost. So let's detect if someone has fallen over. Well, we can do that. We've just rolled out a beta software to do that, because it's so commonly thought about that we thought we'd better cover it off. But in reality, that isn't what you want to do.
No.
What you want to do is detect if someone is about to fall over and stop it, because they've hurt themselves by the time they fall over. So this is this reactive fallacy. And I think what had happened in Sweden, and you're seeing it in some of the care home markets around the world, is people are interested in looking at a technology, saying, oh, it'll give me an alert, I'll put that in, and then there'll be more information in the system, that'll be good, rather than what are the risk factors and early warning signs for this clinical group, be it just old age or be it dementia or whatever, and therefore what can I give that enables clinical foresight to head them off, so I don't have harm and I don't have suffering, I don't have cost.
I think it's that clinical foresight piece
yeah,
that you guys have really brought together with the whole package of all of the different elements. But I think like that means that you are, like you say, a trusted extra worker, extra teammate. You're not at the reactive end when something has happened and the panic bell's rung and someone has to run over to the room and fix something. It's genuinely in that proactive element, which I think makes a huge amount of sense.
That's the nub of it. Proactive through giving clinical foresight to the experts on the ground, and enabling that care.
Cool. So you mentioned Sweden a few times. Was there a particular connection to Sweden? I mean, why? I know it's UK based, and then you went UK Sweden, but why Sweden and not another European country, out of interest?
Simply because the Swedish care home market is so far advanced in its use of technology that we felt that nowhere else would you find a budget like they have. And so we felt that although it was crowded and we felt had been miseducated by the existing players in the way I've described, we felt we could help. We also felt we'd see what other people were doing in the care home space there better than we'd see in the UK or in Germany, for example.
Okay. And I don't actually know the Swedish healthcare system. Is it more similar to the NHS, or is it more of a privatized model?
So the care home market is almost entirely publicly funded, interestingly, which is so it's a slight contrast to the UK.
That's really interesting. And they're technologically more advanced.
They've deployed more technology from this first generation, and there's currently a generational shift from generation 1 to generation 2, and so we're really engaging with people to try and illustrate that the vision-based patient monitoring and management approach is the way to get rid of some of the disbenefits of the first generation.
Yeah, I mean, I would imagine that they're fairly open to that discussion.
We're talking to a great number of people over there.
Yeah, I could well imagine.
Rolling a number of care homes out already.
I would imagine. And so do you have any specific case studies? I know we talked about this before, but do you have any specific case studies that around the real world benefits, either to the patients or clinicians, or even cost savings to the healthcare organizations that you work with? So I don't know. Yeah.
So I wondered if there were a couple of stories that I could share to illustrate. Well, let me give you just a couple of statistics and then try to bring a few of these bits of functionality to life. So I think the benefit to the healthcare provider of rolling out Oxyvisions, let's take older adults, so be it care home or dementia care. We've seen and documented with our partners at Coventry and Warwickshire NHS Partnership Trust in a dementia unit there and secure older adult facility, a 48% reduction in falls.
Wow.
By deploying Oxyvision over a 2-year study, which is now not only published by us in Coventry, but it's going to be published in the Journal of Patient Safety, peer reviewed.
Wow. 48% reduction.
48%.
Oxyvision.
Yeah. And what that means is obviously a dramatic reduction in suffering. But then at the economic level, the staffing level, that led to a 71% reduction in enhanced observation. So someone falls over, if you know they hit the head or you don't know whether they might have done, they either need to go to the accident emergency room or they need to be supervised one-to-one for a period. It's called enhanced observation.
How long is that period of time normally?
It varies, 12 to 24 hours.
Okay, so it's a significant
period of time. And so by reducing falls, you don't need that, but also if you couldn't get in time, so the alert goes off but you still don't get there in time, you can play back that video very briefly, actually blurred, so it's anonymized, and you can see whether someone hit their head or whether they can just be helped back into bed, and just think what it does for the patient in terms of experience.
And also
for the staff.
And also, that patient may have known that they didn't hit their head, but in that dialogue between the clinician and that patient, the clinician might just say, well, look, I don't know whether you did or you didn't, and I have no way to verify, so I'm really sorry, but you know, we have to take the action. And that might be quite frustrating for that person to then have to go in enhanced observation or A&E or whatever.
Yeah,
and they say, look, I'm telling you now, right now,
disruptive.
I didn't hit my head. Okay.
I mean, you can imagine all of these circumstances, can't you? So I think that and what then happens, of course, is you can't staff your wards. You staff to the level you need for normal operation, but if that happens, you suddenly don't have enough people, so you have to bring in agency or bank staff. And so the 71% reduction in enhanced observation, because it's not needed, is a time saving and a cost saving, a direct cashable NHS spend saving, in addition to better for the patient and the staff. So that's a really glorious example, a really magical example of the kind of phenomenon we see a lot. But the other thing is, you know, it saves the ambulance trust and the acute hospital, because that's a 68% reduction in visits to the emergency room.
Wow.
So you don't need
from that user group, from that group of
from
patients.
that study. That 48% reduction is linked to those two direct effects: 71% reduction on site and 68% reduction of paramedic attendance or ambulance.
Wow.
Yeah, isn't that cool?
That's really cool.
Yeah.
I mean, that be honest, were you expecting the results to be that significant, or were you are they even beyond the impact that you thought you were having, or was that in line with where you thought you were?
I mean, we were delighted with them, but I don't think we were that surprised, because you know the amount that enhanced observation takes, the effort the staff have to put into that, and the difficulty of filling those roles at short notice above their normal complement. And yes, you have to be very cautious. So that's the thing, these individuals, be they in the psychiatric population or the elderly population, these patients groups need a lot of support. We have to be very careful with them. It's the same reason that when Max had a seizure last week, we got an ambulance out. You know, he's fine, but you know, these are delicate people who need support. So yeah, so that's, I think that's a good. In the other moving examples are self-harm. So actually we're thinking about Tamsin. Tamsin isn't the patient's name, but I'm trying to remember the lady, I think it's a lady. Yeah, so this is Susie's the nurse, and that is her name, Susie Bruton. But Susie, they illustrate quite well in effect. So Tamsin was in the common areas of an inpatient psychiatric ward. I forget her she has a personality disorder diagnosis, and was known as a risk of self-harm, and also been known from her previous time in treatment that she had episodes of aggressive behavior. So Tamsin clearly has some complex needs.
Sure.
She's in a locked psychiatric facility for treatment and care. And Susie notices that she's left the common area and gone back to her bedroom. And it's a great example where there was a bit of clinical intuition here, because Tamsin wasn't due an extra check. She'd just been supervised. But Susie just kind of wondered. So you think, I know, well, I won't go into the room where there's a risk of aggression. I could provoke something unnecessarily. But if I use the Oxyvision vital signs, I could take a spot check and just check if that's always okay. She went into that workflow I described earlier, looked into the room, and she could see Tamsin. And Tamsin, even before we get is lying on the floor with a ligature around her neck, stationary. Wow. So Susie grabs a ligature knife, gets in the room, cuts the ligature. Tamsin survives the episode. And I don't want to misquote this. Looking back, I'm relieved I checked on her using the system. If I'd waited until her next observation, Tamsin might not have been here today.
Wow. I mean, that's pretty, yeah. I mean, that speaks for itself, really, doesn't it?
Yeah.
That's,
And so,
I mean, both of those examples, I think, indicate the value of what you're doing on a really human level. You know, and I think it's incredible. I also think, I know that you know, compared to that, it seems a bit silly to talk about pounds and pence, but just to go back to the bit you said around the direct cash savings to the NHS, just for everyone listening, when you're trying to engage with the NHS and sell your services or product to the NHS, one of the ways to do that is to talk about cash savings. Another, the holy grail of cash savings is a direct release within the same year, i.e. it's an immediate cash savings. What often happens is you have systems that say, no, look, you pay me for this now, but in 5 years' time, you know, it'll paid itself off, and then you'll get the benefit. But what you're saying right now is by reducing the enhanced observation by 71%, you are actually able to have a direct cost saving to that trust in the same year immediately, which is amazing.
Yes, and the health economics are really important, and you know, because you're a startup healthcare CEO yourself, it's complex, isn't it? So we're actually working with the York Health Economic Consortium, who you'll know are one of the UK's leading health economics groups, and I'm kind of itching for this to be published, and it hasn't been yet, Steve. So I'm sorry, it would have been a bit of a
You can't give
scoop.
us any.
Well, they're looking at acute psychiatric intensive care in older adults, and I am allowed to say that the research will show that the system can reduce costs and make cash releasable savings. I'm pretty excited about when the detail comes out, but we've done the work. Our customers, we're in 40% of English mental health trusts, 5% of the UK's mental health beds, because we can work with our customers to build a return on investment model that gives them the confidence to trust the system with their economic outcomes as well as their safety and quality enhancements. So York Health Economics, I hope, are going to be publishing with us shortly, and will provide an external quantification of that. But we know that's true, and we see that with our customers.
Yeah, I'm sure it's going to come out and be very, very positive. So you've mentioned the US as well. What are your plans to expand, or what are you doing in the United States?
Yeah, so we obtained so the pulse and breathing rate elements, the modules that sit with Oxyvision is not in itself a medical device, but within that software system, there are software medical devices, the pulse and breathing rate modules for spot checking, and in Europe for vital sign trending. In the US, we've just completed and been awarded our US classification as a Class 2 medical device for spot checks for pulse rate and breathing rate measured by chest wall movement. And that is a de novo. So that means that there's nothing on. So when I said this is unique, I could be completely confident in America, because we had to create an entirely new category of medical device for our system. So we got that in March, which is, to be honest, a bit of a coup for UK science. You don't get many.
So again, I don't know of the people listening, that when you when you try and get a medical device regulated in the US, you've got, broadly speaking, two routes. One is that you say, my device is similar to this, so regulate me like this, and I'll launch under the same conditions that this other thing has already launched. If you have something truly unique, you can't do that, obviously, and you have to ask for a de novo, but that gives you a huge amount of prestige and also an element of protection, because the FDA, which is the regulatory body there, is guaranteeing that you are the only thing like that on the market. Right?
That's right. That's exactly right. There's a fair, exact summary. And it means that others have to show that they're as performant as your device to then qualify in that category. So we've created a medical device category in the States. And so Robert McCallum, our VP for America, is out there now talking about 2025 healthcare organizations in skilled nursing, which has the dementia and some of the psychiatric needs in it, with a view to rolling out the Oxyvision service around safer, high quality, more efficient care. So super excited to take this opportunity to the patients and staff in US care, initially in skilled nursing and later in behavioral health, which is what the Americans call mental health, and in the care homes, the assisted living, as the Americans call it.
And are the challenges there the same, or are they different, or what differences are there that you've noticed?
So the economics are different. It's obviously, well, not it's an insurance, mainly insurance funded, although skilled nursing is partly government funded through Medicare or Obama's regime. So the economics of the facilities and the reasons, the way they calculate return on investment is radically different from the UK.
Okay,
that's the nub of it. So what we're going to offer them and provide for them is as compelling, and the same clinical outcomes are relevant and needed and drive efficiency. But there's also a profit motive in the US system that we've not got in the UK system, or indeed in the Swedish care home system, which changes slightly how we position the sale. But the raw benefit clinically, operationally, and financially is actually the same.
Right, that makes sense. And I know that you've mentioned it a few times, and obviously I know from talking before, the demonstrating clinical effectiveness or evidence generation for you as an organization has always been a very strategic element, or a key element of the company. Was that something that you decided to pursue early on? I know that all health tech companies have to have evidence generation at their core, but it feels like from interacting with you guys, is that you've gone above and beyond what would be the minimum requirement and have made it a real strategic focus.
Yeah, I think it's strategic and I think it's values based. So we came out of the Institute of Biomedical Engineering at Oxford, which is designed to take engineering and match it to clinical need and create breakthrough technology. And so Professor Lionel Tarasenko, our founder, put academic rigor at the heart of what we do. So our head of research and director of our Oxehealth Clinical Research Forum, Dr. Oliver Gibson, was Lionel's right-hand man at the IBME. And so is right from the start in developing the technology and validating it, there's been academic rigor. And then what we found is that we could keep that clinical academic engineering rigor, but we needed then to add what we call the insights and benefits realization team, who produce the white papers that you see on our website and do the return on investment work with our customers, because people need to translate that pure academic, really rigorous bit into the business case that they need to support their clinicians. And so we have both, and that's crucial to giving people the confidence to underpin their standard of care with Oxyvision.
And do you think that that's particularly critical because you are, or were, or are by definition, a new technology that did not exist before?
And it's a new industry. So we wrote the paper. There's a paper called Vision-Based Patient Monitoring and Management that Lionel, Oliver and I wrote. We've created the concept of this category to try to support this very specific thorny problem that people have tried to crack and failed. So it's beholden on us to try to explain very clearly the help we're offering and the benefit of working with us. In English mental health, it doesn't look like a risk now because so many people are doing it. US skilled nursing, people need to have the confidence that we've really got this problem and that we can deliver these extraordinarily exciting promises that we're making them. And so that's why academic white papers, white papers, and conceptual understanding of what we're doing around risk factors is really important. We owe that to our partners.
Makes total sense. So we've got 1 or 2 more minutes. So I want to ask one more question and then we'll wrap up, which is, what are the 1 or 2 things, the big, most exciting things that Oxehealth has coming up in the next 12 months?
Oh, wow. In 2 minutes, like,
right,
well,
you can do it.
Well, we've got loads of exciting things. So I think I'm just excited to help everyone who's investing with us get the benefit of Oxyvision. So just doing business as usual in our existing customers and those who are coming to us and saying, I'd like what those trusts have, please. It's just super exciting because the patient and staff benefit is so meaningful. We love to hear the stories back, see the research paper come back to prove again and again that we're helping human beings help other human beings. So that's really exciting. I have to say, America is exciting in the true sense, in that it's the graveyard of British tech companies, but it's also the chance to have even more impact and to really shape best practice over there. So that's super exciting. And then what the Clinical Research Forum, the Oxehealth Clinical Research Forum, are doing with people like Professor Polke, Professor Geddes, Professor Cipriani, in looking to create new biomarkers that explain the risk factors and early warning signs and allow even earlier intervention. And Professor Brindlecombe. So that professorial group that we're working with to create new biomarkers is hugely exciting, because that's where we'll get the breakthroughs for the patients and the staff 2 years from now. So it's those 3 things, I think: the geographic expansion, UK, US and Sweden, the doing our jobs, and the research forum.
Perfect. Well, look, on that note, Hugh, thank you very much. Hugh Lloyd-Jukes from Oxehealth. I wish you all the best. Thank you for coming on the show, and thank you to everyone for listening.
Thank you, Steve.